when the world's too much to handle.
Hey, hey, hey. Hey, hey, hey. We made it to another episode of Oneness World Radio. Talk Radio.
World. Oneness Talk Radio.
Oneness Talk Radio. Yeah, we made it. Wow. Just a little lead-in music. Get us in the mood. Oh gosh, you can never have enough music, I can tell you that. Oh, this is good. Attempt to discover, practice, and understand self-remembering. Wow, it's quite a feat to even begin to understand how to pull off one of these miracles of life in terms of optimal presence, optimal impression, optimal experience of the world around you, optimal involvement, part of the universal fiber that created us. That's what self-remembering has to bring us. So we definitely laid out some early steps, didn't we, Suzanne?
We did. We laid out a beautiful practice. You laid out for us to dive in and divide our attention to bring us into the present moment. And that's been a fun exercise. I've actually played around with it in different spaces. So
yeah, exercise.
Yeah.
So what to understand is how we got here. So a few weeks ago we were talking about the importance of being present, and then the reason of the importance of being present, which led us into self-observation, right? And then the cumulative effects of self-observation were to educate our gatekeeper, the gatekeeper of impressions, the gatekeeper of our entire sensory world, and what we let in and what we deflect or what we don't let in for reasons of either our ability or our sense of whether we can handle something or whether we feel it's going to take us off the journey, take us out of the Tao. And then we got into some transforming of negative emotion,
Yeah.
and which was a nice introduction to having to go back to the fundamental tool that allows for the transformation of negative emotions, which would be the ability to divide one's attention and go into self-remembering. Self-remembering in itself is sort of what it's suggesting. It's the reminder to be where you are, to remember yourself in a given moment. It's like saying be present. But the muscle that's being used in self-remembering is a very powerful muscle. It's just not simply the act of becoming present. It's the act of becoming complete in an active mode in any given moment. That's a different experience. That's a different ask. That is a tool that has to be developed, and that's where we left off.
That's where we left off. And so now we're going to dive a little deeper into self-realization and what it yields.
Yeah, well, here we are, right? So in order to even talk about this, I have to attempt to be exercising the tool that I'm suggesting that you have the ability to take on. And I can say that I'm humbled right now because I feel that because of how my day unfolded, I did not remember myself enough. So self-remembering is not at the forefront of my being at this point in time, but hopefully by the end of this discussion, I would have stepped into a place where I will be remembering myself in attempting to pass along my experiences, my successes, my failures, exercises, in order to maintain my presence in an active form and what that means and the gift that that is.
It's a really beautiful gift, when we get to drop in to the present moment, but a little bit beyond, because I think in this day and age, people might overuse certain phrases and feel they're being present, and maybe they look present and they're in the room, but they're not. And so this is a really good exercise, especially, if you find yourself pretending that you're present in the room, but you're someplace else. This happens a lot of times to teachers. It happens to parents.
Well, the mind's tricky.
Yeah,
right?
so it happens to students. It'll happen to people when I work with them one-on-one. They're like nodding. They're like, look fully engaged, between me and them. And I'm like, how far away are you right now? Because they're not in the room. So this aspect of really dropping in a little bit deeper to self, and, you had us look at an object and ourself and divide our attention there, and that's really powerful. And you can do that between two people. It doesn't have to just be between an object. And that really gets, if both people are present, you can feel it in the space, but it can be an object or whatever you choose to bring you into a deeper state of being wherever you might be.
Yeah, well, for the most part, you're not going to be speaking with people that are either remembering themselves or present.
Well, right now we're both exercising that muscle, so how fortunate are we?
Well, transformation of negative emotion has everything to do with divided attention, and then everything to do with the appreciation of self-remembering, which, as we went over last week, is dividing one's attention between oneself and the environment, or whatever one is receiving. So in our meditative repose, through the present, we're able to grasp higher states of awareness and feel ourselves moving into relaxation, or having a relaxation response as we become present, which is the foundation of being able to use suggestion to divide one's attention. And through that suggestion, there can be a full immersion. And when that full immersion happens, we leap into higher states of consciousness, higher intellectual aspects, higher emotional aspects that bring with it wisdom. But it's that leap. And sometimes when you're initially trying to do this, and try to be here as we talk, try to observe body breathing, try to at least evoke the present moment, and take these suggestions as they come and try them and exercise them and keep exercising them. But understand it's not a close-fisted effort. It's a genteel effort initially. And the discovery that can be made is quite miraculous.
Absolutely. What it really assists with, learning to be present, is it shuts out, all the extra noise that's beyond the space that you're in. So the mind is our transmitter to the collective consciousness, and oftentimes we're going for phones, or we're going for different activities that we need to be in, or thoughts that we're engaged with. But when we really drop in, then that's where there's some pretty interesting things that occur. Plus, just even doing it in this moment, you really feel the centrifuge of the space versus letting yourself escape anywhere else. That's why I used to love teaching in Manhattan in the basement, because it's so busy, 55th and Broadway. But you'd be in this space and you get the student just to drop in with you as if you were just a cube in space, and let everything else drop away. So super powerful things that occur, and some of it's unexplainable and happens in the subconscious being, and maybe the ahas or just the regeneration or nourishment is what feeds you into the next, and helps assist us with the focus and the mastery that we also touched on when we're on the other side of the gate
Well, on the other side of the gate, there's really nothing left to do but to remember oneself, and that's it. And then from the ability to be, the world takes on a different experience in terms of just becomes as it's becoming for me as we move through this, it's becoming a lot simpler. And there's a lot going on right here, right now. I mean, there's a lot happening. There's a whole production happening. I'm editing, working sound. Suzanne's sending out chat messages as we're attempting to have one of the more profound conversations a human could possibly have, and that's this particular craft. But understand some of the tools and some of the things that we're going to have to go into: divided attention, transformation, appreciation of friction, and this leads us into a realm where we develop a type of a will and a consciousness and an ability to act that becomes unsurpassed, really, and it becomes a part of our walking, talking bliss experience from higher states of consciousness. And then how to perceive the world while we are in higher states of consciousness by honoring some basic natural principles, which then open up other doors into whatever realm. You can dive down that rabbit hole as deep as you want, but I think in this particular form, I can deliver some fundamentals, and through those fundamentals, if you practice them and are patient but diligent, you will find your way into certain portals that render great benefits. What's wonderful is you don't need a meditation hall. You don't need yoga. All you need is your life. And how you go about perceiving this life is the friction that you need to evolve and develop the type of will that's going to allow you to sustain right efforts. And that's really important. I mean, the type of effort, the quality of effort that's made determines whether we're actually transforming and physiologically expanding our energetic field,
Right.
Or not.
Yeah.
So the nuanced experience of it is only something that you can take for yourselves. You have to experience it. You have to verify anything that I might suggest, for sure. But understand that no matter what activity you're involved in, it's always better when you're remembering to remember yourself. And that's simply reminding yourself, hey, I've been seduced by negative emotions. I've been buffered from this thing that really is the divine me because of too much imagination. Improper use of my imagination has kept me from simplifying things and being available in such a way that I can be at my potential.
But also reserves your energy. You know, the simplicity takes your energy force and streamlines it so it's not dissipated everywhere, just in the same thing where you can pretend to be present, but you're not. Maybe your mind's going. In the remembering of your divine self, there's a simplicity to that, an ease to that. We're not getting distracted by a lot of things.
Well, if you're in that divided attention and you are remembering yourself, distraction is a moot point. There's no place to be distracted.
Right.
All the portals of perception are full, and they're locked and loaded within the moment at hand. And that's what's so beautiful about it, because at that point there's an immersion. There's an experience of what is, and then the fascination and the nuance of what is starts to come back. And that's kind of runs counterculture to our culture, because our culture is pretty much set up to bombard us continually with all sorts of sensory impressions there to seduce us into other things.
Absolutely.
Which can create some sort of a level of numbness if we're not careful. But that is to say that it doesn't mean the activity, that activity may make you numb without proper perception. But with proper perception, that doesn't matter the activity, because you'll be able to see it for what it is and utilize it for what you want to utilize it for. So it's not limiting activity. Any activity can be done with self-remembering. And that's what's beautiful. It's not a matter of limiting yourself to anything, but everything is exponentially better with self-remembering.
Right. And, like yoga, Thomas was saying you don't need yoga, but yoga, in the sense, is a system that simplifies life in that same way, because it brings you into the space.
Yeah, well, certainly the 7 other legs of yoga address
Limbs,
what
we're talking about.
The 7 other certainly do address what I'm suggesting, and ideally those all 8 parts of yoga, the attainment of what it is that I'm suggesting now happens.
Yeah.
But this is it's not a shortcut, but the fundamentals of it applied, developing enough presence, and then maintaining, developing enough will to maintain presence, and then starting to get to know oneself again through fresh observations of oneself, and continually observing oneself no matter what. It never stops. It's a non-stop. So when you begin to remember yourself, those impressions are self-remembering times 10, because now you're 1,000, because now it's a continual learning curve, and now you're not willing, now you know yourself in a moment and can sustain it.
Right.
So it's the difference between like a still picture and a motion picture. When you're able to remember yourself, now you can sustain the existence within that realm and move through time and space.
Right. And this is a great technique I use a lot for, especially if I'm taking people on retreat. I usually have a high flow that I have to move through, and I'm not really interested in being in rush mode. And so by practicing this tool, and I call it the eagle, becoming the eagle, I'm able to move through space just with great ease and presence, and not feeling any kind of constraint by anything other than the next thing that has to unfold, which is beautiful, versus, panicking or feeling anxious or stressed. And then there's a lot more, then you can pick up on the nuances.
Well, there's no panic, stress, or
right at all.
At this
it's
point,
a conscious shift of what I'm saying.
But it really has nothing to do with slowing down, although the perception of slowing down can happen.
Well,
but what happens
an eagle soaring through the sky is not slowing down, so it's just ease, grace.
You mentioned slowing down before. You mentioned that. You said I like to slow down with it. But the illusion of slowing down can mean that you're conscientious of downloading more information, which can give the illusion of slowing down within oneself. In other words, because of this a new sense of time, a real sense of time, and the mind grasping so much information, it's just like it's like receiving 60 frames per second as opposed to 30.
Right. Well,
you're running more information down, and the picture slows down because you're driving more information into the portals that can assess it.
Just for the listeners to keep it.
It's the neo.
Simple.
Well, this is not going to be simple, but the neo moment where he's in Matrix, where he sees the bullet and he starts leaning back into his great yoga backbend, and the bullet skims right over his chest, right over his face. It's sort of what you're describing.
Yeah, and so it's, you're bending space. There's no real time. It's a construct that's been imposed upon a society. So out in the universe, there's not.
Well, let's redefine that, because there is real time, and when you're self-remembering, you start to begin to understand what real time is. It's not chronos. It's taking place on the time that it takes for clouds to move through the sky, and for seasons to change, and so on and so forth.
Call it space.
Yeah, well, time and space, right?
And those are cycles, really. Like the words are interesting, the syntax and the nuances to them, because time suggests sometimes a start and a finish, but cycles, we're spiraling through space, which has these ripples that aren't a perfect circle like a clock. So just to think of it that way, that we, even the beginning of an annual cycle, whether it's lunar or solar, doesn't start and finish in the same place. So it's this beautiful cycle that occurs.
All right, so let's try to
Bring it back.
well, we're moving forward nicely. I think there's some really interesting points that have been touched on. So understand that there's several parts that will continually be built into this attempt to remember ourselves. One of them is meditative repose, which has a sense of higher levels of perception and acute awareness of your surroundings, accompanied with relaxation. Very little thought, if no thought whatsoever, and that's how we know that we become present. And beautiful things happen through the present. Body aligns itself with the universe, with the planet, and things start to harmonize. Educates the gatekeeper. Now the gatekeeper can start to look for opportunities to transform the challenges in one's life through transforming negative motion, getting a hold of the imagination, understanding that the imagination is the buffer between a mechanical existence and one that's conscious. Proper use of imagination, which can be simply imagination used to solve a problem relative to improper use of imagination, which is used to create fear-based motivations and all sorts of grandiose things that can buffer us and keep us from the simple act of self-remembering.
Right. Well, and the benefit of that is also, I mentioned last week that we still have to chop wood and fetch water, as they say in the Tao, is that in this present state, there's a lot of things that are revealed, but there's still a propensity to take all of that and stay in action within those present moments, which is really beautiful. And sometimes the direction and the pointing is much clearer. You can see it and feel it, where maybe if you're on the other side of the gate, you spend a lot of times just asking a lot of questions and running around in circles, versus stop, pop in, and continue to stay in that fluid state of motion, as you would say, the walking meditation.
Well, zazen, right? Well, in this, it's certainly a zazen, but it's a more powerful. Well, I'm not going to say more powerful than zazen, but within the context of dividing one's attention between oneself and wherever one's attention is, there's an extra added benefit and an experience that the body, mind, and the spirit has. And in those moments, it's expanding. It's reflecting the intelligence of the universe, our earth. Wisdom is now the rule, not knowledge, which
Right.
Previous regular education is more knowledge-based. But when we start tapping into the ancients, we start tapping into the thread that they fed off of in order to gain their great discoveries, share those discoveries with the world. Those are the very things that we have within us,
Right.
that we want
And
to
that's
develop within us, so that we can be
embody
naturally of, when we talked about this, when the time comes, we have an innate inclination to serve.
Absolutely. And the beautiful thing, the other day when we interviewed Dante on our other program, he was talking about the power now, and I went back because I got it for Keswick and was reading some of it, and I was like, oh, how reflective some of the concepts that I shared. Actually went and was looking at when he wrote that book, because I had never read any aspects of it until now. So when you step in these modes, I was just realizing some of the things he shared were similar things that I'd shared, which other people have shared. When you're in certain states of being, you access the same information, and you might interpret it or share it in a different way or similar. Sometimes it seems exactly the same. It's really interesting, even if you never crossed each other's path, that information, So while we have the greats like Plato and Socrates that you mentioned last week, it's fascinating what has been accessed and is actually timeless.
Yeah, there's a list of the conscious beings that have walked the earth, and some of them we still speak their name, even though it was several thousand years ago that they walked the earth,
Yeah, because they dipped more than a toe on the other side of the gate and stayed there for a while.
Well, you can name how many conscious beings can you name? Like Christ, Buddha, Abraham Lincoln was certainly conscious. Epictetus was certainly conscious. Who else can you name?
Caleb Gibran.
Khalil Gibran.
Khalil. I always want to call him Caleb Gibran.
He certainly.
I've had his book, The Prophet, since I was 15. I love that book.
Yeah, well, I think you're in good company. You and about 100 million other people love that book.
Yeah.
At least, maybe 1 billion.
Yeah, beautiful wisdom.
Who else? Who else?
Oh my gosh, it's endless. Shakespeare.
Shakespeare definitely had some mojo going on there, didn't he?
Yeah, I would say a lot of amazing Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, a lot of Einstein. Those are some of the big, popular, well-known people.
The conscious beings, the people that have walked the earth. Lao Tzu, right?
Lao Tzu, yeah.
Right. And certainly there's many conscious beings that are on this planet
right now, actually, yeah.
But completely conscious is interesting, because when somebody becomes that conscious, it's almost like that could be, in this day and age, it could be like they could be viewed as a threat because they're catalysts of change and transition, and so clearly tech companies don't want to not have control if somebody shows up with a type of wisdom that they're trying to emulate, or a government or a community. Like if a conscious being shows up, he has to learn how to act. Otherwise, they'll crucify the guy.
Fit in. You have to learn to fit in.
Right, Galileo, poor Galileo. A lot of these guys that dared to say that the Earth wasn't flat got in big trouble, right? Got to be careful what you say.
Exactly. And now, you have tech companies that are using information to misinform people. So it's full circle. They're still trying to push the flat Earth concept.
The knowledge of the mystics. This is what we're embarking on with this journey of self-remembering is a mystical journey. Because once we get to the other side, the miraculous aspects, or what you might consider to be miraculous, the universe certainly does not consider anything that you may discover in terms of your potential to be miraculous, because it's been there waiting for you the entire time. It was just a matter of whether you could get out of the way long enough to surf your way into that other zone and learn how to navigate it, and how to exercise it, and how to appreciate it, and certainly humbly how to respect it, and how quickly you can have it one day, and how without your reaping, sowing attitude towards the world around you, lose it the next. And then find yourself in a whole world of weirdness, and then, 72 hours, remember what you forgot, and that was to remember yourself. It's like, where did I go? It's like, oh my God, why did I allow myself to go there? So that's also part of the lesson of the gatekeeper, in terms of remaining diligent under any given circumstances in order to feed off of the greatest challenges in our life, so that we can transform and sharpen our characters that much quicker and deeper.
Right. And the powerful thing is, by maintaining that present moment, you're able to stay much more effective in what life is asking of you, where you are in your physical environment, and it really carries you. It builds really beautifully, which is profound. It's all the things that we do on the other side of the gate that create the turbulence, unnecessary turbulence, all those things. And that's why there's been societies all across the globe where they have consciously been on the other side of the gate and elevated to great levels of mastery through maybe their art, their music, their science, maybe just from their state of being, and taken where they've been reported to completely vanish by archaeological standpoints. They have the remains, the physical remains that there was a society there, but no tracks or trails or anything to suggest they went anywhere other than vanished. So pretty profound, you know. I know of
Well, we're all
two.
going to vanish for one way or
No, but I know of two like sites. There's one in Arizona that's like that. There's nothing because there's usually something, you know, skeletons, certain things that are remains. The dwellings are there, and the same in the Amazon, and I'm sure there's many more. Some mystical things on Molokai in Hawaii, down off Costa Rica. There's some islands, you know, interesting things that happen when bringing self into the very present moment. It's powerful, and then wanting to sustain and stay there is that effort, and it can be of great service, you know, for everyone else that's around if you can sustain it, rather than getting drawn into it.
Drawn into what?
Any of those other things we do on the other side of the gate.
What do we do?
Well, it could be the negative emotions we talked about. It could be taking action that's not beneficial, build karmic action that's not building our energy field. It'll eventually lead to the degradation of our energy field. It can be this withdrawals from our karmic bank account, all different kinds of things that we're doing without awareness versus when you drop in the present moment, you're aware.
Well, it's not just dropping into the present moment, which is a sort of a stasis. Self-remembering is an act of effort.
Right, of course.
Of dividing one's attention. So, and then transforming that particular moment, regardless of what the moment is, and feeling the elevation, feeling the wisdom drop in, feeling the intellect take a back seat to whatever might be happening and take a proper relationship to the king, basically.
Right, and imagine every single day being like that. You know, it's pretty special.
Well, it's not, I think it's every day being like that, and they say that once an individual maintains the right effort long enough, they can actually crystallize, and they can actually have the ability to maintain. They would have earned that level of being. Yeah. And you can look at level of being like the Grand Canyon. And Grand Canyon is very beautiful. If you haven't seen it, I recommend a visit. But there's many layers of sediment, and each layer of sediment represents an experience that the Earth has had. And you can also look at that as a macrocosm for yourself. Every moment that you become present, every moment that you remember yourself, adds to that sediment. And if you remember yourself enough, you become as beautiful as the Grand Canyon in a sort of a living metaphor for what true beauty is. And the individual that can remember himself begins to emanate true beauty. They begin to touch on their potential, and they begin to enter into the realms of the gods. And if the efforts sustain and maintain long enough on the right foundation, which is why these basic principles are really important to not contaminate with an ideology that may attach their ideas to your upwardly mobile journey, because at a certain point you're not allowed to really be attached or identified with ideology or ideas, just with the verification of your experience and your ability to remember yourself, which gives you all the information and makes you the orator, gives you the ability to inform others of what's necessary and how to take that journey that you took. Because we want as many people to be conscious as possible. If you're for humanity, if you're trying to exploit humanity, you don't want people to be conscious, because if they become conscious, then they'll be able to see through all the garbage and understand the difference between what's right and wrong, and not be able to be swayed by periphery identity politics, so to speak, and because we're all dealing with the rights, our birthrights of humanity and divine existence, and those are things that we can only get for ourselves. Nobody can give us those things. And that's what's beautiful about evolving and becoming conscious. But you can threaten those that would rather have you in fear by becoming conscious, which leads us into another lesson that I'll definitely give, which is the basis and the reason for acting. And the basis for reason for acting thousands and thousands of years, for thousands of years, is so conscious beings can survive hostile environments, mob rule sort of environments, so that they can take on whatever form they need to take on in order to survive. And when they're ready to let the cat out of the bag and possibly give their lives for the truth, that choice would be up to them, and as to when and where and how they would possibly make the ultimate sacrifice.
I think thankfully we're at a point in time in humanity there's enough people that strive, even though we have the dissipation of many practices, but there's the plight for people wanting to become conscious again. So I don't think people have to hide anymore. Those beacons of light are really helpful so that people have something to look to as an example, so that they can maybe work a little bit more diligently for themselves so they can shine bright for others too.
Well, if you become conscious, I think you'll be able to feel and sense what the reality of your surroundings are and be able to make good choices.
Right.
In this day and age, I think if you're in the wrong town at the wrong time at the wrong place and you decide to protect your building with a mob outside, I think you're pretty much sacrificing your life at that point. So, case in point is that if that person is conscious and they can assess a situation and understand really what's at stake and whether it's time for them to give their life for whatever it is that they believe, and I'm not sure giving your life for a store is worth it. There's other things to be giving your life for. That if you're conscious, you realize that this is what you're dealing with and how to deal with it. Unless, of course, you're a conscious master martial artist, NRA member.
Well, it's
hard to
actually, in this space, there's not a need for guns and
the samurai
mobs at all. Really, you may have an affinity for some of those things, but
no, just survival. Just in terms of survival.
Well,
I'm certainly not advocating. I'm not advocating for any sort of violence whatsoever. It has more to do with survival.
But the survival, I think, is really...
If you're conscious, then you have other types of responsibilities,
right.
I feel, but that is up to the individual themselves to discern under what circumstances do they throw down.
Right, of course. And part of this practice, when you're dividing your attention, just bringing it in the present moment, is very similar to how an ER doctor works, EMT, a lifeguard, a police officer, someone that has to hopefully bring their awareness and attention so specifically that everything kind of falls away and beyond this little microcosm that they're working with. And a lot of magical things can happen right then. A lot of mystical things can happen when you're in that samurai state. Unexplainable things can happen.
Well, if you understand what it is to be on the other side, they become no longer unexplainable. They're
No. I'm just saying, from the onlooker, they might observe someone that's not maybe on the other side of the gate, just but watching it. It could look superhero-ish, in certain circumstances, because they're not in that same state of being. And some of the things that will unfold are not, to the rational mind, not explainable.
Well, let's not also belittle the act or the art of self-remembering. Very few people on the planet
I'm not belittling it at all.
Have the ability to actually wield that sword in the full capacity.
I'm not
of what that means, because
right.
It's not something that you're born with as much as something that needs to be trained.
Right.
I think maybe we were born in relation at one point, but over time to have to relearn the thing that we may have known or had as infants, or a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old, up to the point that somebody made us self-conscious and began to develop the rational, reasoning file cabinet mind that betrays its essence for development of personality. And that's another lesson that we got to get into, the difference between essence and personality, and how to harmonize those things. And through the basic practices already suggested, essence and personality must find a balance.
Right.
Which is really exciting. I mean, that's
Absolutely.
exciting stuff. I mean, I can remember all sorts of wonderful breakthroughs while diminishing false personality.
Right.
What wasn't me, what was developed
Yeah.
on the wrong basis, what was developed through improper ideas of society. Enough to get a good look at what I was.
Right. Know thyself.
Well, I don't know about, I learned an aspect of myself. I knew
Right.
that I wasn't that.
Yeah.
And then
But
through self-observation, to redevelop that personality so that it's there to actually harmonize with essence in order to maintain higher states of being. That's
yeah,
That's
juicy stuff.
That's good stuff.
Yeah, and
That's good stuff.
that's good stuff.
That's really good stuff. That's really good stuff. That's the kind of stuff that gets me out of bed in the morning, when I can get out of bed in the morning.
So, well, let's bring it. All this stuff is really, motivating. You can already feel the motivation. The inspiration to exercise these muscles better than Pilates.
That's good. That's a good transition. Because one of the basic, and that's what we should get into, a few exercises. And the most fundamental exercise, one of the most fundamental exercises that I've ever seen and I've ever practiced that really functions really well is the stop exercise, which is basically an adult timeout. But it achieves the same type of reflective moment that comes from a timeout. But what you can do is, as you're even walking down the street and just taking a simple walk down the street, you can mark a tree, let's say, and then you can mark another tree, and you can say, at this point, I'm going to begin self-remembering. And by the time I get to the next tree, I would have been in a different state of consciousness. So basically it goes, mark the tree, I'm going to remember myself, I'm going to be present, and now I'm going to divide my attention into the moment at hand and make myself get to the next tree as I walk, attempting to remember myself. And so on and so on. So what happens is, once you start getting it, you may only feel like you snapped in just for a few moments, or the moment that you arrived at your destination, you forgot yourself again. And so then you're like, okay, I want to set another aim for myself. I'm going to say, okay, by the end of the block, from this point, I'm going to attempt to remember myself, and by the time I get to the end of the block, I would have remembered myself and elevated my level of consciousness. So you take the journey and you walk and you try to observe body, try to stay present, give the suggestion of dividing one's attention, keeping one's attention on oneself, putting one's attention on the aim. And as you move closer to the aim, a natural pressure begins to build. And through that pressure, if you're remembering yourself, you'll transform this pressure into higher states of consciousness. And then as you arrive at the corner, you'll stop. You'll forget yourself again.
Yeah.
You'll forget yourself. You'll be like, oh, I did it. I did it. I'm so successful. I did it. Who did it? I did it. No, you didn't. I didn't do it at all. It did it. So
It's kind of like being in the gap in the meditation. You're in the void and you come out and you're like, whoa. You don't realize you're there till you're out of there.
well, what's funny is the first thing you want to do is go somewhere else and go back to buffer land, go back to, I did it, I'm accomplished, I'm enlightened, I'm an adept, I'm awesome. And then all those eyes that are saying I'm awesome, I'm good, I did it, are the ones that are obstructing you from that moment at hand where you are not currently remembering yourself any longer. So what you do is you set another aim, and then you embark on another suggestion to arrive at that point.
Right. And so
conscious. So with enough repetition,
it'll get easier and easier.
With enough repetition, she said easier and easier. With enough repetition, you may not be willing to give up what you gained as you arrive at your destination. And you may want to maintain it. And at a certain point, if there's enough fruit in that labor, as you begin to understand the power and the strength of it, you will be less willing to give up that state and maintain it for longer and longer periods of time. So incrementally, you'll be able to sustain the effort for longer and longer periods of time. There is no ease in it. There's just a sustaining of it, and then there's a loss of it. And at the loss of it, how long you stay lost will determine how much further you can go before you remember yourself again. So what happens is you sustain a longer moment, and then you remember yourself again, and then you push the boundary further and further. And is there a stopping point for this? No, there is not. And what you realize that what hasn't been in your life is this condition, and the will that it takes to sustain an effort is quite extraordinary. And then the realizations and the discoveries that occur along the way in the interim of falling back to sleep, and then setting another aim in order to wake up, become more and more profound. And hopefully it makes you ravenous and hungry to sustain an effort and try to maintain an effort.
Well, and the use of the word ease is mean that it's like a formal meditation practice. The more that you go and sit in a formal practice, it's more effortless. Your body, your mind, everything drops away. You pop in, no problem. So if you've fallen asleep at the wheel or fallen on the other side of the gate and you're ready to enter into the self-remembering state or self-realization, the effort will happen more rapidly to get back into that state. It won't take as long. It won't take 3 trees. Maybe it'll only take between 1 and 2 trees if those are your mile markers. So
those aren't let's not miss the point. The idea is not to have the moment. The idea is to sustain the
right,
effort.
Of course. But for the listeners who are learning how to do this, and that they may be going back and forth until they can sustain it all the time. That's not
the beginners that are doing it.
I understood. Don't get hung up on words. The point is that
all we have is words.
The point.
Yeah.
No, we don't. We could just do sounds. The point is that you can bring yourself there quicker, and so that's exciting. Like it's incentive. It's like doing 60
Well, once again, who's happy about getting there quicker? Who's happy about that?
No, it's to ease the person to know that it becomes effortless.
No, it doesn't.
Oh, I think it does.
That it's not self-remembering. So the idea, and not to counter or contradict directly, but the sustained effort of self-remembering just becomes a sustained effort. And so the ease of it, initially, in terms of understanding perpetual 24/7 self-remembering or having elevated oneself into a higher state of consciousness, only not burdens, but one becomes aware of the next level of sustaining that type of an effort.
Right.
And so the effort might go into one realm, but then there's another challenge on the next realm, because the rules of the game begin to change as your level of being accelerates. So it it incrementally becomes really, really, really humbling and challenging.
All right. Well, you try it out. You report back to us to
So
see.
that's the stop exercise.
Yeah. So that's great.
That's the stop exercise. So you can implement that anywhere. In your kitchen when you're making eggs in the morning. You can go from one side of the counter to the grill. You can implement it while you're cooking your oatmeal. You can implement it while you're cooking anything. You can implement it while you're making love. You can implement it while you're going shopping. You can implement it at work. You can implement it everywhere. And the act of self-remembering is going to require you to do that so that you can understand the parameters and the circumstances that life offers you in that environment and where the challenges are so that you can remain awake for those challenges. The problem being that when, or if, or inevitably when you fall back to sleep, there's a vulnerability to becoming reactive or being caught. And a lot of the work is energetic work that builds up in your body. So if life catches you and you become reactive, there's a slip. There's a loss. There's a challenge there. Just as you begin to deflate being involved in whatever type of altercation or whatever monkey business you may have found yourself in as you fell asleep, and the acknowledgement of it and the catching of it as soon as possible, and then the transformation of it can drive you right back up into a really good place, but you got to catch it quick enough and transform it fast enough in order not to lose too much ground.
And that's what I was pointing towards, Thomas, is that when you've exercised this aspect of yourself, it will be effortless to catch yourself and place yourself back there. You may slip all the way down the mountain, but it's going to be a lot easier going back up that mountain, 5th, 100th, whatever time. So just for the listeners to know that, you practice some of these practices or exercises, that they will get easier and you'll pop in quicker. And you'll sustain longer.
I don't even have any sense of ease within it. A relentless pursuit.
I find it super empowering, especially, when ecosystems are set up for that.
But it's just this is just a baby step.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all good.
So the baby step
let's not get too caught up in the minutia of it. Just to keep it simple, so they have things to work towards.
Well, if you find yourself in deep waters, maybe it's time for you to listen.
I'm fine.
Maybe it's time to.
I don't need to listen. I'm engaging with you. We're both presenting here. So for the listeners, just that what we've gone through till this point is that to remind them of the self-remembering and that you have the opportunity to divide attention. And then Thomas has just suggested that if you find yourself in a reactive state or you've lost your remembrance of yourself, you're going to go into a stop exercise. And from there, those are two places that you can do all day long if you choose, that they will start to build, and you'll be incentivized just by the outcome to stay there as long as you can. And then you were also pointing out that if you catch yourself, the sooner you catch yourself, the quicker you can get yourself back there.
Well, and at no point is there a sense of ease with self-remembering. And so don't look for it, don't expect it, don't let your weak little mind aspect of yourself look forward to it being easier. What will happen is it'll become more in-depth. And with more in-depthness comes responsibility. So you feel challenges happening as you enter into the realm. You feel the pressure of maintaining, you feel an obligation. And these temptations of feeling these things become part of the obstruction to maintaining the effort. A lot of times it's a shock to discover that one's been living one's life so frivolously for so long. So as you begin to awaken, all of your preconceptions and identifications begin to make themselves known. So it's just not about maintaining a type of effort. It's it's the realizations and the discoveries that come with it that then kind of wrap themselves around to obstruct the effort of self-remembering. So it becomes this cyclical challenge,
Well,
a beautiful challenge at that. But as we strengthen our gatekeeper, as it becomes more familiar with uncharted territory, the repetition of being faced with that obstruction relative to what it is that you want for yourself, you start to answer those questions. And self-remembering continues. And the longer we can maintain these efforts, the deeper the understanding we have of ourselves.
Well, and that humbling process, you're going to meet those eternal and lifetime karmic patterns, in that moment, because we talked about karmic action. And you will start to see, and sometimes those are humbling moments where you have to just reconcile maybe some of the emotions that come up, which is perfectly normal. That's a good time to maybe stop, pause, allow, as you dive deeper into what that means. Sometimes those awarenesses are so deep that you don't know what to do with them, so you just let them be.
Well, you do know what to do with them at this point. You know to remember yourself.
You remember yourself, but I'm saying there's sometimes, Plato, let's talk about, Plato, of it. They didn't just go, got it. It was like, ooh, wow. Okay, I'm gonna remember myself in this, but it's gonna continue to flower. It's gonna continue to blossom. I can give an example of, just a simple concept of giving. We talked about the karmic loop of receiving and giving. There's so much depth within self-remembering and that activity that you wouldn't just check it off. And yes, you're remembering yourself in the moment with it, but it's going to keep blossoming and opening, just like a great sutra or teaching.
Well, I think the experience initially for years is, I'm currently responsible. Do I want that responsibility? So what happens is that you either run from it or stay with it. So you may run from it for a while, and then you may come back to it once you realize the meaning of your life is dissipated, unless you've immersed yourself in any number of activities that can numb you to the bone. But if numbness is not the path, and realizing your potential in this moment is, then self-remembering is the tool that you're going to use to open up all of those doors. So next week, we're going to continue on this challenging path, this extremely challenging path, with more exercises, more insights, looking at the benefits of friction, looking at conscious shocks, looking at more divided attention. Remember, the technique says, attention here, through my presence, I suggest dividing my attention out to whatever activity that I'm involved in. And in that stop exercise, you have an aim. Aims are very important in order to encourage the compression of time, in order to make it emotional. And through that emotional gain, boom, we shoot up into the higher centers and experience things we may have never experienced before. And that's what's really beautiful about it. So we're going to go into that. Remember, singular will, consciousness, and the ability to take action. Define your consciousness, right. And that's really important.
And I would refer to it as electromagnetic gain versus an emotive gain. But we can talk a little bit deeper about that next week and what that has in store for you.
So here we go. We're gonna go out as we went in.
This is Suzanne Toro and Thomas Ardavany with Soul Vibes, and we're on Oneness Talk Radio.
Yeah, and we're gonna take it out with how we came in with this wonderful. What's the artist's name?
This is Alec Bridges with Refuge.
Yeah, Alec Bridges with Refuge. Here we go.
of a voice. It was silent, but I could feel it calling to me. I had no choice, said take me back to where I came from before I ever even